Every Mortal Kombat game ends the same way. You hit a wall designed to eat your quarters and crush your spirit. From four-armed monsters to emperors who taunt you while you bleed out. Today, I'm breaking down every single final boss in Mortal Kombat history. Starting with the one who had a legendary weakness, Mortal Kombat. The original 1992 arcade release was designed to punish you. 7 fights, a mirror match, 3 endurance rounds, and then, only then, do you reach Goro, 4 arms, half human, half dragon. 9 consecutive tournament victories. If he wins one more, Outworld conquers Earthrealm forever. Goro was digitized from a 6-inch claymation model, which is why he moves differently from every other fighter. The live-action actors look human because they are human. Goro looks alien because he's made of clay. And players figured out you could beat him by crouch kicking. That's it. The 9-time undefeated champion of interdimensional combat, dropped by a sweep kick on repeat. But here's the thing. Goro was never the real threat. He was the wall designed to drain your quarters so you'd never reach the actual final boss. Shang Tsung, a shape-shifting sorcerer who could transform into any fighter on the roster, using their moves against you. While Goro was the muscle, Shang Tsung was pulling the strings the entire time. That template, the hype sub-boss followed by the real manipulator, became the blueprint for the entire franchise. But the sequel cranked the difficulty to a level that still makes people angry 30 years later. Mortal Kombat 2. Shang Tsung was a schemer, a manipulator, a guy who hid behind a tournament and let other people do his dirty work. Shao Kahn is none of that. When he showed up in Mortal Kombat 2 in 1993, the franchise didn't just get a new final boss. It got an upgrade in every possible way. Shao Kahn is the Emperor of Outworld. Not a sorcerer pulling strings from the shadows, but a conqueror who has dominated entire realms through sheer force. He doesn't need a tournament. He doesn't need permission. In his mind, Earthrealm is already his. That level of arrogance is what separates him from every other fighting game villain of the era. Most bosses want to win. Shao Kahn assumes he already has. And here's the thing. In the original arcade version, you couldn't play as him. He was completely off limits. That distinction matters more than people realize, because it made him feel like something the game itself was protecting. He wasn't a character. He was a wall. Later, home ports would eventually make him selectable, and the moment players could control him, some of that mystique evaporated. But in 1993, standing in front of that cabinet, Shao Kahn felt untouchable. He wasn't just a boss fight. He was the franchise's first true emperor, and he was far from done, because Shao Kahn would come back again and again, starting with an invasion that broke every rule the series had established. Mortal Kombat Trilogy. Mortal Kombat Trilogy wasn't really a new game. It was a farewell, a compilation that rolled everything from the MK3 era into one package, giving players the definitive version of that generation before the series moved on. No new story, no new villain, just everything you loved collected in one place. But Trilogy carried something with it that nobody realized was about to disappear for a very long time. Animalities. For anyone who missed this era, animalities were finishing moves where your fighter literally transformed into an animal to kill their opponent. You'd win the final round, and instead of ripping someone's spine out, you'd morph into a bear, a scorpion, a hawk, whatever your character's spirit animal happened to be, and maul them to death. They were absurd. They were over the top, and players absolutely loved them. Trilogy was the last major release to feature them. After this, they just vanished. No explanation, no send-off. Animalities were simply gone from the franchise. For roughly 25 years, an entire generation of Mortal Kombat players grew up never knowing they existed. It wasn't until 2024 that Animalities finally returned through an update for Mortal Kombat 1. 25 years. That's how long one of the most creative finishing move categories in fighting game history sat collecting dust. Trilogy didn't introduce a new final boss, but it buried a feature that wouldn't see daylight again for a quarter century. And honestly, that might be the more important legacy. But speaking of legacies, the next game on this list introduced a villain who'd been waiting in the shadows since before Mortal Kombat 4 even existed. Mortal Kombat 3. Most fighting games have the decency to put one monster at the end and call it a day. Mortal Kombat 3 looked at that tradition and said, no, you're fighting too. The 1995 arcade ladder ends with a back-to-back gauntlet that still haunts quarter collections everywhere. First, you face Motaro. He's a centaur, 4 legs, massive frame, brutally fast, and designed with one purpose, to crush your spirit right before the finish line. You think you're close to the end, you've beaten everyone else, and then this thing gallops onto the screen and starts deleting your health bar. He's not the final boss. He's the speed bump before the final boss, and he hits harder than most final bosses in other games. Survive Motaro, and Shao Kahn is waiting immediately after. No break, no mercy. The Emperor returns for round 2 as the series' big bad, and at this this point, your hands are cramping and your quarters are running low. It's arguably the most punishing final stretch in the entire classic era. But here's where it gets funny. In the home versions of that MK3, players could unlock Shao Kahn through the Killer Codes menu and actually select him in Versus mode. Sounds incredible, right? The Emperor of Outworld, playable at last. Except he had 0 fatalities. No finishers whatsoever. The most feared boss in the franchise, and you couldn't even do a proper kill move with him. The God Emperor had no clothes, and this exposed a tension the franchise would struggle with for years. The moment you make a boss playable, they stop feeling untouchable. But at least Shao Kahn kept his throne. The next game replaces him entirely with a fallen god who makes emperors look like middle management. Mortal Kombat Mythologies. Sub-Zero. Most people have never even touched this game, and honestly, that's fair. Mortal Kombat Mythologies. Sub-Zero was a 1997 action platformer spin-off that tried to blend MK's fighting mechanics with side-scrolling gameplay, and the result was rough. But here's the thing. This janky, overlooked spin-off is responsible for creating one of the most important villains in the entire franchise. Shinnok didn't debut in Mortal Kombat 4. He debuted here. Before he ever showed up as the final boss of a mainline game, Shinnok was the big bad of Mythologies, and the game laid out his entire backstory. He's a fallen elder god, banished to the Netherrealm by the very deities he once stood alongside. With the help of the sorcerer Quan Chi, he escapes his prison, and his goal is simple: vengeance against the gods who exiled him. Think about that for a second. Shao Kahn wanted to conquer realms. Shinnok wanted to wage war against the gods themselves. That's a fundamentally bigger premise. You're not fighting an emperor, you're fighting a deity with a grudge against heaven. And because Mythologies established all of this first, when Shinnok showed up in MK4, he wasn't a new threat. He was a returning one. A god who had already been beaten once and clawed his way back anyway. Players who had the context from Mythologies understood exactly how dangerous that was. The spin-off nobody played, quietly built the villain everybody would fight next, and that fight, it changed the entire direction of the series. Mortal Kombat 4. This is where the series stopped playing small. Mortal Kombat 4 dropped in September 1997 as the franchise's first fully 3D arcade cabinet, and the developers used that visual leap to make a statement. Shao Kahn is out. The Emperor has been dealt with, and in his place stands something far, far worse. Shinnok, a fallen elder god. Here's why that matters. Shang Tsung was a sorcerer. Dangerous, sure, but mortal in scope. Shao Kahn was an emperor, a conqueror obsessed with absorbing realms. But Shinnok, he's not trying to conquer anything. He's trying to destroy the gods themselves. The stakes went from save the tournament to save Earthrealm to save the entire divine hierarchy that holds reality together. That's not just escalation. That's a completely different category of threat. Shinnok first appeared as the final boss in Mortal Kombat Mythologies, Sub-Zero, where his backstory gets fleshed out. He was banished to the Netherrealm by the Elder Gods, clawed his way back out with help from the sorcerer Quan Chi, and now he wants revenge on every god that cast him down. By MK4, that revenge is the entire plot. You're not fighting for a realm. You're fighting to keep the cosmic order from collapsing. And for home console players, the developers threw in a familiar face. Goro returned as a sub-boss, accessible through the stage select code 011-011 for Goro's Lair. Classic Mortal Kombat move. Take an iconic monster, repackage him as bonus content, and watch fans lose their minds. But the real story of MK4 is that villain progression. Sorcerer, Emperor, God. Each game raised the cosmic ceiling, and by this point, there wasn't much higher to go, which is exactly the problem the next game had to solve. Shaolin Monks. Nobody expected a beat-em-up spin-off to produce one of the best boss sequences in the entire franchise. But that's exactly what happened. Mortal Kombat. Shaolin Monks dropped on September 16, 2005, developed by Midway Studios Los Angeles, and it threw out the traditional arcade ladder entirely. This isn't a fighting game. It's a full-blown action adventure where you brawl through Outworld as Liu Kang or Kung Lao, and instead of climbing a tower of random opponents, you face a carefully structured narrative boss sequence. Baraka attacks first, then Shang Tsung, then Kintaro, then Shao Kahn. 4 bosses, 4 completely different fights, 4 completely different strategies. And these aren't just reskinned enemies with bigger health bars. Each boss demanded that you actually learn their patterns. Shang Tsung, you wait for him to shapeshift into reptile, then punish the transformation window with Kung Lao. Kintaro, repeated hammer spin attacks and long jumps to stay out of his reach. Shao Kahn, you play it safe on the outside, throw the hat, dodge his fireballs, and chip chip him down. Every single encounter felt like its own minigame within the larger adventure. Here's what makes this special. You've spent hours brawling through hordes of enemies, exploring environments, unlocking abilities. By the time you reach these bosses, they feel earned. That's something a standard arcade ladder can never replicate. You don't just select a character and fight 8 rounds. You survive an entire journey to get there. The community still treats Shaolin monks as one of the most beloved spin-offs in the franchise, and it's specifically because of this. Classic bosses got narrative context, unique mechanics, and real weight behind their encounters. A beat-em-up understood villain payoff better than some of the mainline fighters ever did. But if Shaolin monks reimagined how bosses could work in a spin-off, the next mainline entry tried something far more controversial with its final encounter. Mortal Kombat: Deadly Alliance. Every final boss up to this point had one thing in common. They were solo acts. One big bad sitting on a throne, waiting for you to climb the ladder and challenge them. Deadly Alliance threw that entire formula in the trash. Released in 2002, Mortal Kombat. Deadly Alliance did something the series had never done before. It made the villains work together. Shang Tsung and Quan Chi, two of the most dangerous sorcerers in Mortal Kombat lore, formed an alliance to do what no single villain had managed. They killed Liu Kang, the franchise's poster boy, the champion of Earthrealm, dead before the game even starts. That's not a spoiler. That's the opening cutscene, and that's what makes Deadly Alliance's final boss situation so unique. You're not fighting one ultimate evil, you're fighting the Alliance itself. In the arcade ladder, your final opponent is Malak, a massive Oni demon who serves as the game's sub-boss, and then depending on your character, you face either Shang Tsung or Quan Chi as the true final fight. The two sorcerers essentially split final boss duties between them. But here's the thing, canonically, the villains win. Deadly Alliance is one of the only Mortal Kombat games where the bad guys actually succeed. Raiden assembles Earth's warriors to stop the Alliance, and they all get destroyed. Shang Tsung and Quan Chi defeat everyone, including Raiden himself. The heroes lose, full stop. Of course, the Alliance doesn't last. The two sorcerers immediately turn on each other the moment they get what they want, because that's exactly what evil sorcerers do. But the damage was done, and the fallout from this game set up one of the darkest chapters in the entire franchise. Speaking of dark chapters, Armageddon took everything Deadly Alliance started and cranked it to an apocalyptic scale. Mortal Kombat: Armageddon. This game tried to be the grand finale of Mortal Kombat, and in the worst way possible, it actually was. Mortal Kombat: Armageddon dropped on October 9th, 2006 for PlayStation 2, and it was the 7th main installment in the franchise. The premise was simple but massive. Every realm, every warrior, every conflict in the entire Mortal Kombat universe was hurtling toward total annihilation. Not conquest, not domination. Complete destruction of everything and everyone. The stakes had never been higher because the stakes literally couldn't go higher. You play as Taven, a warrior on a mission to stop his evil brother and prevent an apocalyptic war that would wipe out the entire roster. Every single fighter you've ever loved, hated, or forgotten about was on the chopping block. This wasn't Shao Kahn trying to merge realms, or Shinnok getting revenge on the Elder Gods. This was extinction, and mechanically, Armageddon matched that ambition by cramming in everything it could. The game introduced adjustable fighter health handicaps, letting you scale any character's health from 100% all the way down to 20%. Every fighter had 2 fighting styles you could toggle mid-fight. It was Midway saying, we're putting every system, every character, every idea into one package. But here's where it gets painfully ironic. Armageddon was designed to feel like the end of an era, a celebration of everything Mortal Kombat had built, and then Midway went bankrupt. The studio collapsed. The series went quiet. A game literally called Armageddon turned out to be a prophecy nobody intended to write. It really was the end, just not the fictional one they planned. But from the ashes of Midway's collapse, something unexpected happened, and it brought Mortal Kombat back harder than anyone thought possible. Mortal Kombat X. Remember Goro? The four-armed nightmare that traumatized an entire generation of arcade kids in 1992? The sub-boss so iconic that his claymation model became one of the most recognizable villains in fighting game history? Well, by 2015, he'd been reduced to a pre-order bonus. Let that sink in for a second. Mortal Kombat X launched on April 14th, 2015, and NetherRealm made a very specific marketing decision. If you wanted to play as Goro, you had to pre-order the game. A character who had been terrorizing players for over 2 decades was now locked behind a paywall before the game even shipped. And fans were not happy about it. The backlash was immediate. Players argued that Goro was a legacy character, someone who had been part of the franchise since day one. Locking him behind a purchase incentive felt less like a reward and more like holding a piece of Mortal Kombat history hostage. And honestly, they had a point. This wasn't some obscure, deep-cut character. This was Goro, the original Nightmare, the guy who made kids waste their allowance money one quarter at a time. But here's the thing about the actual final boss. Mortal Kombat X brought back Shinnok, the fallen elder god who first appeared in mythologies and then served as MK4's big bad. This time around, Shinnok gets his hands on Earthrealm's life force through Quan Chi's scheming and transforms into a corrupted version of himself. Corrupted Shinnok is grotesque, a hulking skeletal abomination radiating pure Netherrealm energy. He's the final fight in the story mode, and Cassie Cage, Johnny Cage's daughter, is the one who takes him down, a next-generation hero defeating an ancient god. It's a passing of the torch moment that actually works. But the Goro situation tells you something important about where the franchise was headed. The bosses weren't just characters anymore. They were brand assets, marketing tools, monetization opportunities. The thing that used to make you scream at an arcade cabinet was now a line item on a quarterly earnings report. And if you think commodifying one classic villain is bold, wait until you see what the franchise did with its entire timeline in 2023. Mortal Kombat 2011. Let's be real for a second. By the late 2000s, Mortal Kombat was basically dead. Midway went bankrupt. The franchise that defined arcade violence was sitting in legal limbo with zero guarantee it would ever come back. Then, NetherRealm Studios rose from the ashes, and their very first move told you everything you needed to know about their intentions. They brought back Shao Kahn, not some new villain, not a reimagined threat. The Emperor of Outworld himself, restored to the final boss seat in a game that was essentially saying, we're still Mortal Kombat. We always were. The 9th game in the series returned the franchise to a 2D fighting plane after years of awkward 3D experiments, introduced the Super Meter system, powering enhanced special moves, breakers, and the now iconic X-ray attacks. It felt modern and brutal and tight in a way the series hadn't felt in years. But the story is where Shao Kahn truly earns his spot. This isn't a tournament victory scenario anymore. In the rebooted timeline, Shao Kahn obtains Blaze's power and straight up tries to kill Raiden directly. No rules. No Elder God oversight respect. Just a godlike emperor launching an open assault on Earthrealm's protector, because he's done playing by anyone's rules. The endgame escalates from win the tournament to survive a divine execution, and it works because the entire reboot builds to that moment of desperation. And here's a fun detail that says a lot about where the franchise was, mentally, by 2011. The post-launch DLC roster included Scarlet, Kenshi, Rain, and Freddy Krueger. Yes, that Freddy Krueger. A horror film icon standing on the same roster as Elder Gods and interdimensional emperors, and nobody blinked. That's confidence. That's a franchise that knows exactly what it is and isn't afraid to have fun with. But the reboot didn't just resurrect the series. It set the stage for a new generation of villains, starting with one that had been lurking in the shadows since Mortal Kombat 4, Mortal Kombat 1. And then the franchise did something poetic. Mortal Kombat 1 launched on September 19th, 2023, across PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X/S, Nintendo Switch, and PC. Another reboot, another reset timeline, another fresh start for a series that has burned its own universe to the ground more times than most franchises have existed. But the real story isn't the reboot itself, it's what came packaged with it. Shang Tsung, the original final boss, the sorcerer who stood at the top of that arcade ladder back in 1992, waiting for quarters. 31 years later, he's back, not as a final boss, as a pre-order bonus. You pay early, you get to play as the guy who started everything. Let that sink in for a second. The villain who launched an entire franchise, who was the reason millions of kids pumped coins into cabinets, is now a marketing incentive. And here's the thing, it's not even the first time they've done this. Mortal Kombat X pulled the exact same move with Goro, the original sub-boss, dangling him as pre-order DLC back in 2015. The franchise doesn't just recycle its villains, it monetizes its own nostalgia with surgical precision. But the 2023 reboot wasn't done reaching into the past. A 2024 post-launch update called Chaos Reigns brought back animalities, the finishing move category that let you transform into an animal and maul your opponent. Last seen in Mortal Kombat Trilogy, absent for roughly 25 years, gone so long that an entire generation of players had never seen one outside a YouTube compilation. And then, just like that, they were back. The franchise didn't just reboot its timeline, it reached into its own grave and pulled out something it had buried decades earlier. And that's the full circle. In 1992, a 6-inch clay model of a 4-armed monster stood between you and victory in a dimly lit arcade. The final boss was a shape-shifting sorcerer rendered in digitized pixels. The stakes were fictional, but the quarters were real. scale. Now, 32 years later, the series runs on post-launch content drops, live service updates, and pre-order character unlocks. The final boss has changed, the scale has changed, the business model has changed. Shinnok replaced Shao Kahn. Chronica bent time itself. Entire timelines have been created, destroyed, and rebooted. But strip all of that away. Every cosmic threat, every elder god, every timeline reset, and the game is still about the same thing it was always about. Who gets to decide what happens to every realm in existence? That question started with a sorcerer on an island, and somehow, after 3 decades, it still hasn't been fully answered. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.